Hello, good evening to everybody on the FA course, everybody from the Film Archives, the Institute, and also all the guests, and people also watching this stream on the FTII channel on YouTube. So, good evening to everybody. Allow me to introduce our two hosts for this talk today. Arunaraje ma'am is a critically acclaimed writer, editor, director, and producer. She graduated from the Institute with a gold medal. She's a winner of 5 national awards and has been teaching filmmaking and founded Shift Focus, a school for cinema and life. She has been a life coach and strong voice for gender equality.
Can you just wait a moment, Anupam? Mr. Rabi Hashmi, can you put off your sound? Can you please? Yeah, because his mic is on and there's some disturbance there. Yeah, please, Anupam. Yeah.
Okay. She has been a life coach and a strong voice for gender equality, empowering men and women to find a new equation to live in peace and harmony. Her autobiography, Freedom, My Story, is an inspiring account of her life and films. So, yes, welcome, ma'am. Amit Tyagi, sir, he is one of the few FTII alumni with 2 diplomas, one in film editing and a post-diploma also in film direction. Amit Tyagi sir has worked every part of the audiovisual spectrum, from documentaries to television series to fiction films, both in India as well as internationally. He returned to the FTII as Dean of Films from 2016 to 18 and is currently the Associate Director of MIT School of Film and Television. Welcome, Amit sir. I now request Aruna madam to take over and introduce our guests.
Thank you, Anupam. Thank you, everyone who's here, and especially a special thanks to all the people, all the panelists who are here, and to celebrate really, right, Centenary. And I'll begin by introducing Sharmila Tagore. She began her career with Satyajit Ray's Apur Sansar. She was just a little girl then, 13, 14, and then followed up with Devi shortly afterwards. Then she went on to do Nayak, Aryanyadir Ratri, and Seema Badda with Satyajit Ray. But in 64, she already did Kashmir Ki Kali and became a mega star in Hindi cinema. And even when in Hindi cinema, even when she played all these major roles in very commercial big hits, she also played roles, different kind of roles in Mausam, Aradhana, Amar Prem, Dag, and they were very different kind of roles. And you wouldn't believe it that at the same time, she was more or less moving between an evening in Paris, there was a Satyakam, there was Nayak, all at the same time. You know, the kind of versatility, diversity she was bringing, the kind of work she did. And of course, she's a former chairperson of Central Board of Film Certification, currently Padma Bhushan, and you know, she doesn't look it, but mother and grandmother to a few film stars. So welcome. Now to talk about Aparna, she also began her acting career at the age of, I think it was 15, with Satyajit Ray's Samapti, a part of Teen Kanya, a set of short films based on Rabindranath Tagore's short stories. And she also became a major star in Bengali cinema and did a few Hindi films as well. As a filmmaker, she started with 36 Chaurangi Lane, and that's an extraordinary film, and people haven't seen it, you must catch up with that film. And she's produced a remarkable body of work and won a whole lot of national awards, and she's also a Padma Shri awardee, and one of those rare people where father and daughter all making films, all big in films. Her latest film, Ghare Baire Aaj, is revisiting Tagore's novel, Ghare Baire, which was also made by Satyajit Ray. Now I'll talk about Sri Shamik Bandopadhyay. Shamik Da is a very well-known name in the world of writing about theatre and cinema, as well as book editing and publishing. In Kolkata, he's well known for clear, perceptive, and deep views on the arts, but he's not very widely known. It's not known that he's one of the first people to take Marathi theatre, Vijay Tendulkar, Satish Alekar, and Mahesh Eklunchwar to a national level in his English writing about their work. To readers today, his books and articles on Mrinal Das, Mrinal Sen's Akalar Sandhane made for riveting and relevant reading. So we're very glad to have you, sir. Now we talk about Hari. Krishnan Hariharan is an FTII alumni, a filmmaker who has made award-winning feature films in Marathi, Tamil, and Hindi. Hari is also an accomplished teacher of filmmaking, film history, and film theory. He has been associate, I think he was heading the L.V. Prasad Academy of Filmmaking, and he's also been teaching at Ashoka University in Sonepat, Kriya University in Chennai, and has been the visiting faculty at, I think, almost all the film schools in India. I think many of you might have heard of him. His father, known as Kodak Krishnan, was the vice president of Kodak, and as a result had great relationship with all filmmakers in India, including Satyajit Ray and his legendary cinematographer Shubhrata Mitra. Now, Ananth, old friend of mine, is an actor, so many things, screenplay director who's been associated with films and television since the early 80s. He's also been a very active theatre person, and before that, working in both English and Hindi theatre in Mumbai. He's been associated with films in both Hindi and Marathi. He is also a winner of national awards and many other international awards. He's currently working on a feature film based on a story by Satyajit Ray. It's okay for me to say that, right, Ananth?
Absolutely.
It's not a secret, no?
No.
All right, good. Thank you. All right, so welcome everyone again.
Ma'am, should we introduce Dr. Agashe now or only when he decides to speak?
Yes, I think you do that right now. Do that right now since he's joined us.
Okay, let me introduce Dr. Mohan Agashe, Padma Shri, psychiatrist, actor, ex-director of FTII, extremely accomplished theatre and cinema person, and in his last incarnation, a film producer as well, who's known for the films he has produced. I can see he's kind of dropped out hearing all these things being talked about himself. He's not the kind of character who believes in yesterday. He's living in the moment. So you'll see him. I'm sure he's up to something now, which we'll hear about in 3 months' time.
Yes.
Welcome, Dr. Agashe.
Yes, Mohan is one person who wears many hats. So you don't know next time what hat he might be wearing. So welcome, Mohan. It's great to have you. So I think we'll begin with this. And I'm going to start with the first question really to Rinku, Sharmila ji, that you appeared in 5 of his films. 1959 was Apur Sansar. 1960 was Devi. Of course, you must have started work before that, but these were the films that came out. Then 66 was Nayak. 70 was Aranya Ratri and 97 was Simabadha. So what was Manikda's process of getting you into the character? Now I really ask you to look at 3 different phases. When you were very young, when you started working at 13 or 14, how was it being directed by him? And then as you grew a little more mature, how was that? And then you came back as a major star. So how was that experience? How did he, yeah. Your mic has to be unmuted.
Yeah. No, thank you, Aruna, for your lovely introduction. Manikda said that he had always he preferred to work with newcomers, but he's also worked with good newcomers and bad newcomers, and good professionals and bad professionals. These are his own words. So I don't know which category I was in, but I was absolutely raw. Although my co-star Shomitra, he had some theatre experience. He had worked with Shishir Kumar Bhaduri, so he was a little more experienced, and he was mad about cinema anyway. He was totally committed. I was just a schoolgirl. So I was very new. And to answer your question, first he invited me to his house. I went there with my parents. And so he looked at me. I was wearing a frock, as we called it those days. And he said, "Oh God, you're destroying my illusion about Aparna. So, Monku, please change her instantly." So I went in. This is the horrible sound. Is this bothering you? I can't do anything about this construction sound that is. Can you hear it?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So anyway, so I went to another room and Monkudi dressed me up. So made me, my hair was put into a little bun and, tightly. And then I wore a normal sari and a blouse. And then I came back and, they put a little bindi and said, "Well, welcome, Aparna. This is my Aparna." So I think visual, casting was very important for him. The look was more essential than even acting, let's say, because he, as he said, that even later, when he was working with professionals, he even had so-called quote unquote bad professionals. So I think he required a certain kind of face, certain kind of, my youth, the innocence or whatever I was at 13, appealed to him and okayed by him. And I remember my first days of shooting, which was like really, he told me what to do. The door opened and he said, enter. So I crossed the threshold and entered. Then he said, one step forward, look up, look right, look left, raise your shoulders a bit, sigh, cut. Excellent. So that was my first take and okayed in the first take, despite the instructions or because of the instructions. And then the next was the crying scene. If you remember, if you've seen Opu Shangshai, the curtain, the torn curtain and the eye, and of course, Subroto, fantastic. And that was, he asked me to cry. So I cried, but then because the camera was behind me, so he said, now shake your shoulders a bit. So I did that. So that was the kind of instruction or the directions he gave me the first day. But that stopped. The second day when we did that scene, when Shomitra is opening the cigarette packet and then it's written, and just before that, I untie the knot that he's put in my sari and I walk off and I playfully. So that was all, as he said. So he would all of us were given a script and he would come very close to us as one-on-one, like almost like he didn't want anybody else to hear. And he would tell you, just read out the scene. And the way he read out the scene, one could understand that what exactly he wanted, So that was that. And throughout the film, we did that. I had a very short role in the film. And the only way, once I couldn't light a matchbox, that beautiful scene where my face is lit up only with Subroto's magical lighting and I look divine, absolutely. But I couldn't light, nobody knew, Manika didn't have a clue that I had a phobia about lighting a match. I thought it would explode on my face. So 1 take, 2 takes, and on our budget, we couldn't really go beyond 2 takes. So there was a lot of tense faces. Then I think Shomitra came up with the idea that why don't you just light the match, off camera, and then I'll hold it, I'll bring it up slowly, and then light his cigarette. So the problem was sorted. So that was the only tough moment. And Devi was, of course, a different kind of film. It was a year later. I was a precocious, I read a lot. I was, not like today's 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
So we were very Indian, and I read a lot of Indian, like I was reading Bankim Chandra, Sharat Chandra. So I was little paka, Rina would know what paka means. So not precocious, but paka, like really grown up, beyond my age.
Okay.
So I could understand baby a little bit. And then the rest was again, Subroto's fantastic, atmospheric lighting and those heavy garlands and the incense. So that was the young period when, and although it was at that time when I was doing it, I didn't realize that we were making a film like Devi. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It still remains my favorite and my best performance, I think. So it was then, and then later, when you're talking about Nayok, that was in, I think, 67-ish, I think, because that was exactly at the same time with Evening in Paris. If you can imagine Evening in Paris and Nayok together.
That's right.
I defy you. I defy you. But if you can, it was simultaneous shooting, except when we shot with Manikda, it was, all together dates. But before and after I was shooting for, and when the film released at the Berlin Film Festival. Nayok did, hero did. I was shooting at Interlaken with Evening in Paris. So as far as stardom or Hindi film exposure, it had happened, and but it didn't really interfere. And by that time, as you say, I was a little bit more matured. I don't think Manikda quite instructed me the way he did earlier. So the later films of Shima Bodho and Nayok and Arunidin Ratri was very different. So we all had scripts. And thank God, only Shima Bodho's script sadly survives. Other scripts, I don't know, I've lost them. It's so sad. But we all got this handwritten, bound script with even images in the margin. And so when you read the script, you had an idea. And then when he read out the scene, before each shot, he would come very close to you. And being very tall, he would make eye contact and read out the scene. And when he read out the scene, it was somehow very clear. And if he didn't like it for some reason, he would come very close to you again, and nobody could hear. And he could say, can you just do it like this? Or can you just look right? Or he would give you some kind of instruction, which you then did. So he didn't over-instruct at all. He observed you, he realized what you could do, and he kind of did everything around that. So we all came out looking very good and, like wonderful actors.
Yeah, great. So wonderful to hear this down memory lane, I'm sure. Yes, I'm going to ask the same question to actually Aparna, because she also started as a young girl and then she also with him. And how was that for you? Was it very different?
There's a very strange story which sounds like it's made up, but it's not. Just like you too, I used to also be a reader, and because I went to an English medium school, she was very particular that I should read Bengali books, Dashagur and Rabindranath. That somehow the assignment was that you have to read Golpo Beach. And I was reading Shamapti. And then I thought, because at that time I already decided to be an academic school. And I thought, if somebody were to ask me Shamapti as Minnu, how nice that would be. It sounds very strange, but that's what it's like. And instinctively, I knew that it would be true.
Aruna, can we request others to switch off their mics, please?
Yes, I'm going to do that.
Because
yes,
please, only she should have a mic on.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so it was very strange, but I knew that it would be Ray on the line. And, I picked up the phone and there was this booming voice. Chitu Ache. Chitu is my father, Chidananda Dasgupta's pet name. So I said yes. And I said in Bengali, Apni ke bolchen, who's speaking? Though I knew very well. He said, Manam Satyajit Ray. So I didn't have to say my name. There was no need. I could have said, Apni dhorun, I will get my father. I said, Ami or Bodo mein Aparna. There was no need to say that, but I said it anyway. And I went and called my father, and Baba had a chat with him. And then he called me. He and Ma called me to the balcony. They were having tea, and I knew what they would say. So Baba said, Manik wants you in this film that he's making for the race Tagore Centenary, Shamapti. I said, Mrinmoy's role. He said, yes. But don't get your hopes up. You'll have to do a film test. So I was taken to a studio, and as just like Rinku described, I was dressed up in a striped sari. A nose pin was put on my, nose stuck with paste, and my hair was tied up in a bun, and no blouse. And I thought I would at least maybe have to recite a poem or something. But I was asked to look down, look up, look side, right, look left, that was all. And I was very disappointed because I thought, is this all there is going to be to it? Looking down, looking up, etc., etc. So, but he said, he said, okay, fine. They both said fine. And in fact, I remember Monkumashi, that's his wife, asking me, would you like to use your own name or would you like another name, a different name for this? So I said, no, I think I'll use my own name, Aparna Dashgupta. But, I mean, earlier on, he would tell me what to do all the time. Yes, do this, do that. Just basic instructions. Frown, more, that kind of thing. And then one day, I was feeling, I used to wistfully wish that I would get a chance to show that I could act. Because I was good in school. I got prizes for dramatic ability and so on. And then one day, there was this squirrel called Chorki that was supposed to be in my hand. And I'd really just acquired this pet. And I was going to show my friend Rakhal, the little boy, through the bars of the window of their home. Inside the room, Shomitra was being shown his sister, Rakhal's sister, as a prospective bride. Now, Chorki, the squirrel, was supposed to slip out of my hand into the room, and I was supposed to rush into the room and turn the whole place upside down. So it was actually quite a funny scene. And Chorki, I don't know its gender, so to this day, Chorki would invariably slip out of my hand. I mean, he never stayed still. But that day, for some reason, when he started action, I held Chorki up and I loosened my palm and Chorki stayed put. Chorki just wouldn't move. So I was very conscious of, of film being wasted somehow. And I didn't want the shot to be rejected on my account. So I pretended as if I was showing it to Rakhal and I put it down inside the sill, as if to show Rakhal. And then when it went inside, then I pretended to suddenly notice, oh my God, it's gone, and I ran in. So that was done. And I remember Bongshi Kaka, that's Bongshi Chandragupta, shaking his head and saying, holo na. But Manik Kaka was laughing a lot. And he said, no, I rather liked it, And that was my little moment of triumph in the film. And so that's been retained. That is there in the film. And then later on, when he cast me, actually, he hardly ever cast me. I feel very envious of Rinku sometimes, but he hardly ever cast me. Even in Shomapti, I was not supposed to be there. There was supposed to be a girl called Shukriti Thakur. I think he had a fondness for Tagore's. So Shukriti Thakur's at the last, I think they objected. And so I was cast because Monkumashi said, have you seen Chitu's daughter? So after that also, except for Piku, except only Piku, every single time it's been that somebody, either I've had to do a cameo or somebody else couldn't do it, therefore I did it. So I used to tease him saying that, you always use me as a stepney. Always as a stepney. But I remember that when I did this cameo in Jono Orono, I was used to his telling me what to do. So I said, how do you want me to? He said, come on, I don't have to teach you how to act anymore. So he said, just do what you want. And, she is right, Rinku's right. He used to read the scene out. And if you could even do 50% of that by just imitating him, it was almost, it was really done.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was such fun to listen to. Now, since we have an actor here who's also worked with, I think we might take it forward to Mohan and see how he was. How was his experience? Yeah. Yes, might be interesting to hear another experience.
Well, in my case, I came on the scene much later, in 1981. When he was already known to be world master. And I have in my tribute already said that he was doing a telefilm of 52 minutes. But when I met him, he had come to receive us at the railway station. That was the first shock to me and Humpuri. When we were wondering how to identify any person from Manik's unit, and we came and stood in the door, And we arrived on the platform, the one head popping up through the entire crowd on the platform was Manika. And so he said, why you have to come? We were quite embarrassed. And he said, no, you are my actors. I have to come. And the story repeats. First thing we had to do when we went to hotel, he got both me and Om to his room and did the same exercise, which was done by Ringo and Aparna. And then next day, what I like is he was doing the precautions, care and meticulousness. He was, if he was doing his first film, which was amazing. And script. The first day, Om forgot the script in the room. And so when we started, he said, "Sir, just a minute, I'll go and get my script." And I told him, don't worry, I have script. Mahendra said, no, let him get his script. So I think when he gave scripts, he had instructions for the actors in that script. So he didn't like using somebody else's script. And then his khata was there by that time. My first scene in the short film was doing puja. So I had this tabak, which I had to move like this, and I had this bell in one hand. But right in his second letter, he wrote to me when we agreed that I would do the film, and he said, I have to tell you something. We have a scene and a shot where you are doing puja, and where you have to do this with one hand and with the other hand, you have to. So if you're not used to this, please practice it. Maybe because I'm Brahmin at home, used to that. And later also, when I waited, both for home, generally, he wouldn't give instructions as far as acting is concerned. But if he didn't get what he wanted, he always found another solution, which was amazing. And the other day, I described the scene which he did when I come back after visiting Chamarvasti home, and nobody wants to see wife at that point of time, wants to avoid her. So I was wondering how to enact that. But the way he had designed the scene, I didn't have to do much. In 4 shots, he told me, when you see her coming towards you, you turn and exit so that you avoid her. Then you know she will follow you. So go lie down on a charpai. The moment you see her entering, put your arm on your eyes. Check. 3rd shot. When she asks you a question, turn your back towards her and look at the wall. And when she doesn't stop, then show little irritation. Now and you don't need an actor. You need a good follower. And people would think you are a great actor. Right? Well, these are some, and though he had planned meticulously everything and every shot, the flexibility he had, because that short film was to end and the climax was supposed to be done in hot sun. And one day, unexpectedly, like it happens in India, there was cloudy weather and one wasn't sure. And as it would happen, next day it started pouring. We were shooting some scene. Maneka said, stop, let's do climax. And the scene of Smita walking in from Chamarvasti, seeing Om lying dead, were all done. Maneka got drenched, right? But finished that thing as long when it was raining. The kind of impact it has when you see the film.
Absolutely.
Amazing. And one thing which I forgot to tell in that interview was, after the shoot, I had to go to US, so I asked Manikda that I will come back and then we'll do dubbing. He said, no, Mohan. We have to finish dubbing before you go. Right. So please come. But the film was not edited. He didn't have the edited. But what he did was, in that Indrapuri studio, of a kind of equipment he used, one would suspect whether any film would be done or not. That's great thing. What he did with what he had is amazing. And that's where I learned that art is making the best out of worst. And he dubbed me without image. He gave pilot. I said, listen as many times as you want and exactly repeat the rhythm which you have in pilot. Don't worry about it. I will sing it. Today, in the digital world, people do all nonsensical things. The stretch of voice and everything. Manenda, without this, sing sound with the right emotion, with the right face and everything. What I learned in those 14 days, I had not learned in years, or sometimes students in FTII don't learn in 2 years. That was amazing. That was the experience. Right?
Yes, that's right. You're so right. Because he was very, very precise, very meticulous, very exacting. He knew exactly what he wanted. And that was the amazing part. And not just that, but the kind of dedication I think all of us have learned. I don't know today how many people dedicate themselves to them with that passion and with that commitment. So that's really something. Amit, you'd like to ask the next question?
I think Hari needs to come in and just tell us some of his stories. He's seen Charulata, the preparation for Charulata. He's one of the rare people around.
Yes, of
And
course.
He can tell you a few stories there. Hari, please.
Sorry.
Sure,
Yes,
sure.
please.
At the FTII, that's where we had this great professor called Satish Bahadur. He was, always telling that for him, Ray was God, And he would say there is only one filmmaker in this country. He is an artist with a capital A. The rest are technicians. They're all T's. And this is a true artist. And they said, what do you mean by an artist? He said, an artist is somebody who uses his inner creative juices and does not rely on technology, And I did not really believe this. Is it so true? That's just Mohan has beautifully said, So I said, maybe it's true. And then in 1963, when I was 11 years old, Subrata came home with the entire storyboard of Charulata. It's in big sheets. And he put them on the floor. And he told my father was the marketing manager of Kodak at that time. And at that time, they were introducing a new Kodak stock called Plus X. And Manikda told Subrata, I think you should go and meet Krishnan and get ideas of how to use that stock. Now, here is the technician talking. This is Mr. Ray, a technician who understood technology as well as he understood the arts. So there is on the floor with all these beautiful storyboards, all the images and Bansi Chandragupta's sketches of the sets, lighting plan. And you will not believe this if I tell you. There is a 40-second musical score in the opening sequence. Dun, 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 da, 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 dee, da, 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 dun, da, 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 dun, da. It's written on the storyboard. And I was wondering, why would somebody write musical scores here, But then, for me, it was great fun because Subrata and Dad were discussing how to light up the scene without a single shadow. And this was one film which he was shooting entirely indoors. And he said, Ray had told him, I don't want shadows. It should be like daytime. So they came up with an idea called the bounce board, where they put a lot of these 100-watt bulbs in a big box, put a butter paper and put it on various places so that you get soft light, everywhere soft light. This was devised all in my home, but I was too young to understand it, honestly. And then in 1973, I come to FTII and I saw Charulata, the full film. And there I saw the magic of that first 7 minutes. I want you all to go and see that first 7 minutes again. And you will notice that from the time she says in the beginning that the clock strikes 4 and she says, Brojo, go serve tea. And then she goes around, Brojo says, and then she goes around the house, she picks up a book, and then she picks up binoculars, she's like blah, 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 everything. And then she comes back to the corridor, she goes to play the piano, and then her husband walks in, and she comes out, and then you see the clock. After 36 shots, you see the clock, and the clock says 4-7. How did Manika know that it would be 7 minutes at this shot? And then I realized, Arey, that music score was that. He had even planned that 40-second music score so that he had to come here at 4-7. Now, this is no digital era. He had no stopwatch to actually time these shots. But he was a complete technician. A complete technician. He understood this. And if you see that scene, and many, there was an article in Sight and Sound, which was Penelope Houston had reviewed it beautifully, the question answer with Manika. And she asked him, why do you make films, in India where nobody really watches your films? You're rather making for a very small Bengali market. And he said, I make it for the joy of cinema. I just enjoy doing this. And every time I see that first 8-7 minutes of Charulata, you can see it is the joy of making film. In that is a lesson. You can see every lens is used, a wide angle, a normal, an ultra wide angle, a telephoto, a zoom lens, a track shot, a top angle, low angle. Everything is used. And you will realize this is a master class in cinema. He was actually teaching us how to make films, And I think that's so important for me that he understood technology. And as Mohan beautifully mentioned, this idea of spot dubbing, on the location. He did this for many other films also. Because, please understand, we must all understand one thing, that he had very limited budgets to work with. Very limited budgets. And we all are today pampered by the Netflix and Amazon to say they are giving crores of rupees and all that, And it was nothing like that. So, in fact, he had to take on multiple roles. At one point, even operating the camera himself and editing it, scoring the music, writing the screenplay, designing the costumes, everything he had to do. And I think that's what I admire about this man, that he was as consummate a technician as much as he was an artist. And that's what we learned, all of us. I think all of us young filmmakers who came out of the FTII at that time, we all learned, whatever part of India we were, I am convinced that regional cinema in India came into existence because of this man. The idea that you could do not just one kind of film, that you could do a variety of genres. He did children's film, he did whodunit, he did the Patil Panchali, he did, comedy film like Parash Patar, all kinds of films he could do. And suddenly it gave us this whole idea that, why should we stick to just one kind of storytelling? That we need to be versatile. We need to explore the gamut of stories that are available in this country. And so, if you come to Chennai, for example, you had two great people dedicated. One was Balu Mahendra, who always would talk about Ray. Balu was always, indebted to Ray's films and his work. And there is Sangeetam Cine Maestro. In Kerala, you had K.G. George. In Karnataka, you had Karan Kasarwalli, Prema Karan. And if you came to Telugu cinema, you had Vishwanath, borrowed a lot of ideas from him. And then Hindi cinema, you'd see Sham Benegal, Sai Paranjit, yourself, Arunaraje. All of it. In Bengal, you had Aparna, you had Gautam Ghosh. All devotees of Ray. Janu Barua in Assam. Even Kantilal Rathod, in Gujarat, he made films with him in mind. So he's almost a beacon, for us, a torch for us, saying that, look, you can do it. If you just put your heart and soul into it. And I must tell you, my father would always say, when you would go to Calcutta to visit him, he would say, Krishna, sure, come along, I'll give you 15 minutes, come. He was busy. He was just working 18 hours a day on every aspect of the film to get it so precise and detailed, He had to work. And every project, as Mohan correctly said, was a new project for him. I asked him once at the Chennai festival, "Do you have a formula to give us? You make so many films here. We struggle to make 2 or 3 films, and you make 26 films already. Hari, it's not easy. Every production is a different product. Every time you are meeting a different producer, a different financier, and on top of that, he used to hate these phone calls of some inaugurate this society, come for this film festival, come for that consultation at NFDC. He said, this is the worst thing to do. I have got enough, just this much time to make movies. And people go on torturing me to do this and do that and do this. I cannot. Sometimes he says, like, get lost. I'm not doing it. This is my film. That's my first love, and I will do it. And I think that's what all of us as regional filmmakers in India learned from him, that don't be afraid. Don't worry about winning national awards and, that is not the point for making film. You enjoy making it, make it.
Absolutely.
And that's the best thing. Yeah.
That's right. And that inspiration will always be there, because even making Pather Panchali was not easy at all. I mean, so many years in the making, and the kind of things they went through to actually get that done. So that was the real inspiring thing. But I want to ask another question here. Maybe
Sharmila ji wanted to say something.
Just wanted to add to what Hariharan ji was saying, what he did for regional cinema. I just wanted to say that he showed that you don't need extraordinary budgets to make good film. You need extraordinary intuition, extraordinary imagination, extraordinary preparation. So I think that's a great learning. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, that's absolutely true. You're so right. That's what one needs to bring. I want to really talk about what was the influence in his life. Like, there's so much of that Brahmo Samaj influence. And can we have somebody tell us, Shamikta, would you like to tell us a little bit about the influence, his background of Brahmo Samaj?
Now, personally, I don't think it was so much of the Brahmo Samaj.
Okay.
Because you should remember that he lost his father very young.
Okay.
And a very difficult bringing up that her mother had to undertake. So there was no question at that point of time of responding to the Brahmo Samaj or knowing about it or having that ambience around him. Not at that point of time. What is most interesting and what is most exciting and what a learning experience for all of us is that he created that culture, the culture in which the Brahmo Samaj had become a part of it, the Brahmo Enlightenment had become part of that. That culture, he imbibed himself by his own effort.
Okay.
And this came after Shantiniketan. As a matter of fact, he went to Shantiniketan, but we now have his letters written to his mother at that time, in which he hates Shantiniketan.
Yes.
He doesn't identify with Shantiniketan at all. He found it too namby-pamby, too effeminate, and he didn't have that rich cultural ambience, the tensions of a change in culture in Shantiniketan at all. And while he was in Shantiniketan, he was not attending his classes, his art school classes. He would come back to Calcutta again and again to watch the new Hollywood films that were appearing in the theaters. So all these are in his letters. But when he comes, and as you know, right at the beginning, so there was no question of initially by Western music, that's his first love, and his second love is cinema. The one problem that he had with cinema, and this problem he talks about in his writings and he shared with us in his conversations in the several interviews that I had with him, was that Hollywood was such a formidable, well-organized, financially strong industry that he genuinely felt, that a creative individual with imagination, with an individuality of his own, would not be able to work the Hollywood way through. He wrote scripts, and he told us later that he was not writing the scripts to make films out of those scripts, but to understand and learn the structure of the film. So doing a script was for him a kind of an exercise in imagination as to how to confront cinema, how to engage with cinema. And it was only, and his engagement after the Hollywood phase, and something very interesting, he was fascinated by John Ford, of course, he refers to Ford again and again, but he was more interested in Jean Renoir, and his favorite Hollywood film was The Sadhana by Renoir. Because here is a filmmaker of a different mind altogether who comes to Hollywood, and how did he come to terms with Hollywood? That fascinates him. The Germans, Fritz Lang and others working in Hollywood, films fascinate him. So he's looking for a different entry point and not surrendering or submitting to Hollywood. And that is what takes him to the Film Society. He initiates the Calcutta Film Society with his friend, Aparna's father, Chitata, who has already come into our story. And watching film, but it was Bicycle Thieves in 1950 in London that gives him the idea, well, here is a way to step out of Hollywood, to step out of the system and be an independent, creative filmmaker with the minimal of resources. In a war-torn, war-shattered Italy, Disica making his film out of nothing. So I would say that that was the first spurt of inspiration. And the second thing, where your Rama Samaj question also comes in a way, the culture, the history that he had not inherited in his blood from his father or grandfather, nothing of the kind. He imbibed it himself. He constructed and instilled it into himself by making the films. Because if you follow the course of the films, the continuity, the sequence of the films, it's the story of his class, his community, the educated Bengali middle class. And the educated Bengali middle class First World War, post-First World War in the 1920s, is a class that comes from the villages, from the Mafassal, from the small towns, to be educated in Calcutta in the colleges and chalk out a life for themselves. So this was a new reality. After the capital had shifted in 1912 from Calcutta to Delhi, there was a different space altogether, a cultural space, which was filled in by these migrants from the West of Bengal who brought in their cultures, their cultural memories, the historical memories, and planted them in Calcutta. The politics of Calcutta, the culture of Calcutta were defined in these years. And if you come to think of it, just remember that shot when Aparajito, the second film, opens. And that, I think, is the only point anywhere in Rai's films where a date comes in as the train trundles over the bridge to Benares. The date comes in and it is 1920. So we immediately calculate, we can calibrate the history of Oppu. He would be 10 years old then. They must have been born 1910-ish. And he comes, and it is Oppu who turns into Shomitra, and there are these flashbacks in a way. Immediately after Oppu Shamshar, virtually immediately after Oppu Shamshar, he goes to Devi. And very interestingly, connections he made, his reading of history, his engagement with history. In Aparajito, there is a sequence where Oppu and his friend Pulu, they come back talking animatedly about a performance of a 19th century Bengali play, Shodha Barakadoshi. And they talk about a performance directed and played by Shishir Kumar Baduri, kind of a mentor for Shomitra. But in Devi, you have Shomitra playing Uma Prasad, watching a performance of the same play 75 years ago, played by Girish Ghosh. And he watches it in the 19th century as well. So these are flashbacks going back into the background. So this lifelong engagement with history, showing this class in its self-identification, in its self-assertion, and in its terrible decline and crisis in the films of the 70s and 80s. So this is a history that he imbibed and created and reread for himself. And with that, I think he made his audience also. An audience which grew up with him and stayed with him. May not be enormously large, but a committed audience. And I would just like to round it off with one thing. Late in life, barely a year before his death, he had written a letter, a personal, unpublished letter to Aparna's father, Chetuta. And I had the opportunity of reading this letter, and in which Chetuta had raised questions about the so-called commercial cinema and the art cinema, and the divide between the two and the contradiction between the two. And Ray says very categorically that whenever he made films, he had to keep in mind that somebody else had invested the money and that person should get his money back. That was his responsibility. He couldn't be the free artist with a capital A. And he ensured, and he took great pride in that fact, that no producer failed on him. He makes that claim. And he says that he could do it because he could create an audience, supportive audience for himself. And I think this is his engagement with history and taking his limited audience along with it that gave him the freedom and the joy of making something.
Yes,
Aruna, I
that's
want
great.
to come in. Aruna, with your permission.
Yes,
may I
yeah,
come
of
in?
course. Yes.
I really don't want to see Manikda's entire work through this, your earlier question, what you had asked about this Brahmhot, the earlier
Yes.
question, which is a
Yeah.
bit through that prism. So what I would like to say here, the film, Devi, for instance, addresses this very, very openly and clearly. And it is the first to 19th century, early 19th century, where the clash between the reformist and the Hindu orthodoxy is at its worst or best, or whatever you want to call it. And it says it very clearly what happens. And after the film was released, there was a lot of criticism of Manikda, calling him, because he's Brahmo, he wanted to poke fun, or he wanted to mock Hinduism, which wasn't true at all. In fact, the song that Ebar Tuke Chini Chima during when he's this man's daughter is miraculously saved by Devi, and he's singing devotional song.
Yeah.
He could have taken any of the devotional songs that existed already, like Atul Prashadi, etc. But he didn't. He wrote that song himself. So he was very balanced in his filmmaking.
Yes.
He was not looking through a Brahmo prism at all.
Not at all.
So not at all. So
Yeah, just
I need to clarify that. But another point, yes, Reena, 1 second.
Sorry.
Just in a minute, just 1 point, is what also he picked up from that learning was education of women. It's very little, like in Opu Shangshar, Opu is teaching Aparna, CAT, CAT, MAT, MAT. Very little, but education. Same is repeated in Devi. And you would see that kind of parity, like a nuclear family in Opu Shangshar. It is unheard of a 13-year-old or a young bride is living alone with a man without. Otherwise, they would get married, but she would be left in her mother's house, etc. So they are living so, and then that shot again, what I had said earlier about playfully hitting him, and so that shows parity. You know, I mean, he didn't do overt sexual scenes. But in every film of his, the women and men have parity.
Absolutely.
Whether it's Mahanagar or wherever you see it later. Mahanagar, the girl doesn't leave because the family doesn't want her to work, but she leaves in protest against the injustice done. So the Brahmo prism is, I'm afraid that is, yes, he was a Brahmo, but he didn't bring it to his cinema making, but he brought certain evaluation, certain understanding, and certain knowledge to that. You know, like I said, education, etc. Sorry, Rina. Yeah.
No, I
Liberal
just
reading of this history.
No, I just
And
Rina
the
wanted to say
Brahma history
something.
also got incorporated into it. It
I
became a
just
part
want
of it.
add a small thing, and it's not because I'm a Brahmo myself, because I'm an atheist. So, see, it is in the Brahmo prism, but the Upanishads, as Shamika said, probably he read later on himself, but there is a sort of lineage that goes, and it sort of comes into your DNA because of the way people live, the people in your family live, and so on and so forth. What happened was, I think that the teachings of Upanishads were added to his the way he learned filmmaking from Hollywood and from, as he says, from musical compositions. You know, there is always that sense of spirituality. The religiosity of the Brahmos turned into a kind of spirituality in Rai. And what happens is that you have always the individual, and this is there in Tagore as well, always the individual set against a context. Always there is a context, a universal context, almost as if, you know, these people are there, they're living out their lives, their joys and sorrows, but there is another life going on beyond that. You get the sense in Aparajita also, you know, the sundial is there. And this famous use of leitmotifs, of course. The sundial is there. And then the sundial is rejected when he goes off, it's forgotten. But the sense that you get is that after Sharbujaya dies, after Opu has gone away to Calcutta to live in Calcutta, that sundial will still go on telling the time. That is the kind of spirituality that you get in Rai.
Yeah, that's right. And also the relationship with men and women at that time for him to create was also something quite amazing, because it comes in so many of his films, the kind of equation that he's looking at. Now, the other thing is that initially he was relying on a lot of, literary works of other writers. And by that time, a lot of them were writing the Renaissance, kind of the new Bengali writing was happening. And he was actually doing that in much later. He was supposed to have been writing his own stories. So you want to say something about that?
Actually, I think the point that I was trying to make is that the way he was learning, reading, imbibing that history, and also articulating it in his films. And what Aparna was describing as spirituality, I would rather say humanism. Because humanism is all embracing, all inclusive. And that is what is there. And an awareness of the local and the universal, which is so much part of the humanist concept. I find that sequence fascinating when in Aparajito, you will remember, as the mother Sharbuja is packing all his materials into the suitcase for his travel to Kolkata, and Sharbuja just looks up at Opu and a little embarrassedly says, "This won't go in, the globe." And the globe becomes such a cumbrous appendage as he lands in the Shialda station.
Yes.
He had to handle his suitcase, and the cumbrous globe. The globe is larger than the little world in which he had lived. So, and he plays with this image so brilliantly. And then he lands at the station, crosses the road, goes over, and he takes shelter under a shed. And suddenly he hears a language which he doesn't understand. And they look at it's a Chinese, two Chinese are speaking Chinese. So this opening out, so the local and the global, the contradictions between men and women and the constraints, throw them over. Now, he got a lot of that in literature, in the older literature, and also some of it in contemporary literature. When he was using contemporary literature, he had fights with the authors, with both Shamik Bandopadhyay and Shankar, who had come out in print, that they didn't like his interpretation. So he was using their material more as raw material. But he had a very different attitude to the earlier writers who had a greater sense of that cultural continuity and its inner contradictions. And when he could interact with them, Sharmila brought in that wonderful point about the song that he writes. And that is a traditional, typical Hindu song, because he has to give the faith element, the faith in history, a tangibility, something concrete, something real, not just wish it away or throw it off just like that. Its presence should be there in the cinema. And the presence he creates again and again. But later on, except for Kanchenjunga and his last works, he never wrote his own stories as such, because he felt that there was more of history, more of continuity, and the concern also, the lifelong concern that he had to relate to his audience. And the Bengali audience is prime audience. Their reading should also be part of the watching and acceptance of the cinema.
Yes, absolutely.
So it mattered a lot to him.
Yes, absolutely.
Arunaji, can I ask one question, if you don't mind?
Yes, go ahead, of course.
Yeah, because Rai is always almost talked about the great director and all, but there is another side to his personality, and I just wanted to pick up from what Shamik was telling and what Hariharanji was mentioning about these formative years as well as the regional cinema, about his contribution to the film society movement. And incidentally, Chidaranand Das Gupta's also birth centenary is going up, and they both were instrumental in starting the Calcutta Film Society in 47, and which led to that entire nationwide movement. And he was the president of that society till his death. So I think maybe we can just, if Shamik and Aparna ji can throw some light on that aspect.
Shamik, I think.
Now, Aparna, why don't you share some of your wonderful
Yes,
memories,
especially with your dad.
memories of cinema in the home?
First, to start with, I have to tell you that I had not seen any Bengali film at all, not even one, before Patil. We were not allowed. We were not just not allowed. Then I complained bitterly to my classmates, saying that, to my father, saying that all my classmates have seen the Suchitra Uttam Staras and I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen a single Bengali film being a Bengali. So Baba said that next year, I will show you a Bengali film. Manik's film will be ready and it will be released. And I saw Patil Pachari. I just wanted to mention that. Before I went on to say that I actually, when the Film Society was formed, I was not at a stage when I was aware. I was far too young. I mean, I was really a toddler probably. What I remember of the Film Society is that in the balcony, we had a huge balcony in a house in Palm Avenue. And there was an 8mm projector and a sort of screen set up. And what would happen is Film Society members would gather there, and films like Battleship Potemkin Alexander Nevsky, Ivan the Terrible, then Passion of Joan of Arc. All these films, Bergman's films, would be shown. And then Film Society also then started a film festival, which I saw even as a young adult. Over there we saw, at the Film Society shows, we saw films of Kurosawa, Redbeard, Rashomon. We, didn't know that films like that could be made. I mean, now when I think about it, at that time, we took it for granted because those were the only kinds of films that we were shown. So we thought all films would be like that. There were so many films we didn't understand. In fact, there was Hiroshima Mon Amour, which I saw and didn't understand a word. I mean, Baba explained a bit about the context, but it engaged me nonetheless. I can only describe the Film Society movement in terms of what I saw, that, Film Society members would come. Akka, Vijay Mule, when she came, she would come. And Horishadhan Dashgupta, Ashish Bormon, all these people, used to come. Manik Kaka, not so much, because by the time I was aware of the Film Society movement, Manik Kaka had already started making his own films, and it's very difficult for an active filmmaker, and he used to make films every year. So it's very difficult for an active filmmaker to be associated in that way. But of course, he remained the president. He used to write all the relevant letters, sign them, and so on and so forth. But this is what I really remember about the Film Society movement. And what happened was that, cinema started being studied as a text. Now, that was the most wonderful thing, because it was not just a story that was being told. It was a story which had a historical context, a societal context. All these things were discussed. I mean, I never took part in the discussions, but I took care as children. And, I compare it to children being brought up in a musician's home, where constantly, they're exposed to ragas. So, they know the ragas. So it was something like that for us. And, it was much later that I really started becoming aware of the Film Society movement, the Federation of Film Societies, which was started later. And Akka took a big part in it. I remember that. I remember Mari Seaton coming and staying at our place. These are some of the things that I remember. I think Shomita will be able to tell you in a much more scholarly way than I can.
No, but what happened is that
No, I want to say before you do your scholarly, that Robi Ghosh introduced me to Film Society. And I learned so much. It just expanded, as Aparna says, that it sort of expanded my horizon. I'd never seen, like Joan of Arc. It was like, when she's asked her age, and she's counting it on her fingertip, it's something that will stay with me forever. So the excitement of going there and meeting those film buffs and then discussing it later, that kind of approach and that kind of awareness of looking at cinema, it's entirely came from Film Society.
Not scholarly, but I'll rather give a completely non-scholarly take on the Film Society movement. The passion from cinema in the home, as often experienced it, turning cinema into a home, living with these films. And I remember when I was just in college, I became a member of the Calcutta Film Society and a member of the Cine Club of Calcutta simultaneously, because that would give me the chance of watching the same film twice. Because the same foreign films came and they were screened by different film societies. So if I had a double membership, then I could watch it twice. And it's important to watch it twice to get the film in. So that kind of a build-up of a passion for a community and enlarging the community.
Shomita, Just one interjection. It's very funny. That's why I'm going to tell you. So, watching the same film twice, that's why you did it. Baba and Manikaka watched David Lean's Brief Encounter 11 times together.
I'll give you another story, which is thank you for the David Lean thing and the Brief Encounter thing, but something more interesting. I remember in the 80s, much later, when the film society itself was declining, vanishing, whatever you call it, and we were always lamenting it. I remember an occasion when I took Naum Kleiman, the archivist of the Eisenstein archives, who had come on a brief visit to Kolkata, and I took him to Manikda at his house, and Manikda was very warm, and we talked about it. And at one point, Manikda tells Naum, well, you know, I saw Battleship Potemkin so many times. A print of the Battleship Potemkin had been available in Calcutta, a gift from the British Film Institute through some connection, and which was being screened again and again and again in homes of Chetuta, Manikta, and others. And Manikta tells the story to Naum. After having watched the Battleship Potemkin 23 times, for the 24th screening of Battleship Potemkin, I decided to provide a music to it. And from his personal collection of records, he had a fabulous collection of Western music records. He arranged the records point to point and played them on an old gramophone, which had to be wound and wound and wound. And he played this whole music through one particular screening, the 24th screening of Battleship Potemkin he was watching.
Right.
Now he got excited and said, do you remember what you played? He said, how can I? And now said, what a shame, because then in addition to Edmund Meisel's legendary music, which was banned internationally, and the Shostakovich music later, we could have a Satyajit Ray music for Battleship Potemkin. And then as we, and the passion of it, the love of it, to take part in it. This is what the Calcutta Film Society and the Film Society movement gave to its members, not just watching and taking it in, not consuming it, but engaging with it. And that was a wonderful charged moment when I was leaving and we walked up to the door. And as usual, Manikda would come up to the door and open the door himself and show us out. Now is shorter than me and Manikda with his height. We were standing together and Manikda suddenly tells Naum, I have a desire. If I could ever spend one whole day in Eisenstein's room all by myself, maybe something of his genius would fall on me. And he said it so movingly and so charged. And I said, you're welcome. The next time you're in Moscow, give me a ring. And I'll open the archives in the morning, his room, his working place, and put a board on it. It's out of bounds for everybody else. And you can stay there for the whole day. It never happened. It was too late. But that is the passion that the Film Society instilled in people.
Yes.
And the people carried it on till so late in life.
Yes, and that's what really young filmmakers must learn. The passion, if you have the passion, so important. It's really the driving force. There's nothing else. At this point, I want to ask Ananth, where did you see all your Satyajit? Were you also watching films from Film Society, Ananth? Where did you see all the Satyajit Ray films and get influenced? You're mute, Ananth.
Yeah, at the outset, I must say that I was just very happy sitting here and listening to this absolutely awe-inspiring, series of experiences, evaluation, and analysis. And it made me realize that the more you know about Satyajit Ray, there's so much more left to be learned. And this was absolutely fascinating, and I was spellbound. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for this very enlightening experience. This was something I always look forward to as a student of cinema. Yes, Aruna, I am a product of the Film Society movement. And since in Bombay at that point of time, we were fed with, the traditional drama and music of Hindi cinema, it was very interesting to note that there existed another language of cinema. In fact, the real language of cinema beyond the formula that Hindi films used to dole out. And when I visited, I'm not including the European and the continental and the other films that all of you have just mentioned, the great films that you mentioned at the Film Society. But the Indian cinema, for me, suddenly became a new movement when I saw Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Ritwik Gattak, Adur Gopal Krishnan, KG George, and Girish Kasravali. And all of them who suddenly meant something different to cinema was speaking another language of cinema. I realized that cinema meant much, much, much. It was, light years beyond what we were being exposed to in Bombay. And maybe that is one of the reasons why Satyajit Ray never wanted to, venture out of Kolkata and make a Hindi film, though he finally did make two of them, Shatranj Ke Khiladi and Sadgati. But this was an education for me. And like you so correctly said, watching these films again and again, today I still keep repeating Satyajit Ray's films because every time I keep watching them, I realize that I'm learning something new and I see something between the lines, and it educates me and enlightens me as a filmmaker. So I think I'm extremely grateful to the Film Society movement for having brought in the great cinema of the world, particularly the kind of cinema that we weren't exposed to or we weren't being released at the regular theaters. And I'm extremely, that was a wealth of knowledge that we gained. And that's where I discovered Satyajit Ray. That's where I discovered Pathar Panchali. That's where I discovered how, when he had gone to a particular location and he had seen all the fields and he had earmarked and sort of penciled in that location to shoot. And when he went back there 6 months later, that field didn't exist at all. It was all shorn and it was cut off. So how does one face this? These are the kind of problems that we face today. Absolutely, I wouldn't even say low budget. I would say no budget. I would say the kind of content, very high content that we are trying to make and aim at, and without the help of funds. It is so inspiring that a master like Ray has gone through this entire experience. So there's no reason for us to complain and say that we do not have the resources to make cinema. All that we need is great content. And I think that is what I am aiming for too.
Ma'am, can I add
Yes,
one thing
please,
about
yes.
I just wanted to add to what Magdum sir was saying. The Film Society movement was pretty instrumental in carrying Rai across to the non-Bengali parts of India. I think that's because remember that that point, if you were, for example, like me, brought up in a Hindi-speaking zone, you didn't see regional films. They weren't released there. So where did you catch the films? When you joined the Film Society in Delhi in college, and there you caught the Rai suddenly. So in a sense, Rai would have very much remained a Bengali filmmaker with an international reputation were it not for the Film Society movement, which literally carried his work across. Besides, I'm an FTII person, so we obviously like to claim something that, all of us seeing films did go back to our hometowns and say what a great filmmaker he is, and why the hell don't you try and see Rai's film somewhere, to all the people that we knew. So in a sense, we also contributed a little bit, but basically it's the Film Society movement which also carried Rai's work to the non-Bengali speaking audiences across India. Hari, I think you need to add to this. You are the man.
I must add one point here, is that the film society movement was largely driven by one man called P.K. Nair. He was daring. He broke all the rules. According to me, he was the first pirate in India. But he did great work because he duplicated Fateh Panchali thousands of times. Come on, take it, Let us see who's catching me, He duplicated, Citizen Kane. He duplicated Battleship Potemkin. In fact, you will not believe he gifted me one copy of Battleship Potemkin. Tu dekh, pagal hai tu sala. Tu dekh. I saw it 300 times during my days at FTII. At that time, it was called Battleship Hariharan. I knew every shot by heart. But he is the silent man here, who never showed himself in the public. But if the film society movement is succeeded in India, it's largely because of P.K. Nair. And of course, being a Malayali, he favored Kerala a little more. So the film society movement in Kerala is just amazing.
Yeah.
Every small village and town, people are watching Bergman. In fact, when Bergman died, they declared a state holiday. There was a state mourning for Bergman. They were such big fans of Bergman. And of course, today, Kim Ki-duk and all. But Nair, P.K. Nair led that whole charge. See these films. These are meant to be seen, not to be preserved. See, that's the difference between an archivist who's passionate about cinema and who's preserving cinema. That's all I want to say.
And to add to that, Hari, that there's so much analysis of all these films in Malayalam. You will not find it in other languages, analysis of all these films. You will not find in other languages, but in Malayalam, you'll always find that, if you go to YouTube, there are lots of these. So people are really, that's why, it was so, we were very lucky to be exposed to Satyajit Ray and Fateh Panchali. That was how we started this thing. At this point, I'd like to ask Aparna, as a director, what was the influence of Satyajit on your, in the way you made films or the way you grew up understanding cinema as a director?
As I've said before many times, both Tagore and Satyajit Ray, we inherited them. They kind of flowed like DNA in our bloodstream. In fact, what was difficult for us initially is to move away, try not to be derivative orientated, to concentrate on his strength and try to combine which were, for instance, I in my first film, of course, it's coming over and over again, the leitmotif. But the very fact that I used a marginalized character like an Anglo-Indian rather than Bengali middle class, was an instinctive effort on my part to try and move away. But what he did teach me on the very first day that he called me after he'd read the script, no, not that day, the day I finished my film, after I finished my film, the day I went to visit him, he said, so how has it come out? I said, Manikaka, there are many mistakes. And he had this booming voice. He said, of course there are mistakes. How can you expect there not to be mistakes in your very first film? But are there any moments or not? So that is when I learned that a film is not just a stringing up of perfectly taken shots. It is something that, you have to create moments that the audience will take back with you. One of the things that I learned from Manik Kaka, without even realizing it, is to make your audiences care about your characters. It's very important that the audience cares about the characters in a film. I mean, for instance, Satyajit Ray was blamed for selling poverty to the world, India's poverty to the world. I would say he did not do that. I just want to say that he dignified that. He was faceless, rural poor. He was a middle class person, right? He came from the Bengali middle class intelligentsia. But why did he choose? We know that he had illustrated Patil Panchali as Amati Dhipu, the children's book, etc. And those images stayed with him. He's told that to me himself. He told me. That's how it came to him. And that's how a film comes to you, through images. But the very fact that, that time India had just become independent. I think Ray, like many other Indians, had the dreams, the Gandhian, Nehruvian ideals of what India would become, because he had seen India under British rule. And now that India had become independent, I think he wanted, this young filmmaker wanted to embrace his whole country, wanted to bring the rural poor into the kind of cinema he made. And therefore, by making us care about Durga and Opu and Horihar and Sharbojaya and Indi Thakurun, who were all part of the rural poor, he made them our equals. He made us care about them. Absolutely. This is something that I think, you don't learn literally. You learn in very subterranean ways.
Yeah.
It just kind of seeps into your subconscious and then it comes out. So one of the things that has come, detailing, yes, definitely. Detailing, I was in any case I'm very particular about detailing. But the very fact that, you, like when I made 36 Chaurangi Lane, that people would have to care about what happened to Violet Stoneham. And not for once did I worry about what the audience would say. Would this be accepted by an audience? First of all, he assured me that it was time to make English films. I was about to put it away in a drawer. All my friends said, wonderful intellectual exercise, now put it away in a drawer and forget all about it, because you'll never get a producer. So I said, I will put it away, but let me just please have Manikaka read it once. So I gave it to him. And if it hadn't been for him, I don't think I would have made the film. He said, you have to make this film. You'll have to get a producer. He even told me who to go. And then he said, I said, but Manikaka, an English film. He said, it is time that English films were now made in India. English is an Indian language. It was he who said that to me. So, there's so much that I've learned from him. One of the things that he said, little details that I'm remembering just at this moment, as I speak, is that if you want the audience to remember something, it is not enough to just say, show it once in your film. You have to do it at least twice. Otherwise, it will not register. Now, these things stay with you, and then you know that a character, for instance, even in Satyajit Ray's films, even a small side character has a kind of evolution and a denouement, So those are the things, that when you create a character, you've created a character, right? So what happens to that character? It's a side character. It's not a main character. It's not a central character. But it has to be given its own space, its own denouement. You have to show that character at least twice and show a minor, even if minor change somewhere. I'm not being very articulate, I'm afraid, but
you are actually. We're getting it.
Ma'am, Dr. Agashe wanted to say
yes,
something.
that's right.
Sir, Mike, yeah.
Well, because Aparna mentioned it, when it was Raw made with Manik Dasu poverty, the difference was he showed dignity of living in poverty. But unlike the businessmen in filmmakers made poverty as the unique selling point, he didn't do that. And I think this was followed by many other good filmmakers, particularly Adur, Gopal Krishna, many others. The poverty, dignity of living, whether you're poor, middle class, whatever, that is one. Second thing, because when I talking to him, one, he told me, because there was obviously point like making English film, making Hollywood, or making film in Hindi. He didn't like it at all, frankly speaking. So he made Shadgati, and Shatranj Ke Khiladi. He said, look, Mohan, I make films for Kolkata because that's what I know. And I know, and that is why I have to do films in Bengali because they're primarily meant for people I know, the place I know, the nuances I know, and everything. And that's why I will make films in Bengali. That's what I like the most. And when it is um, then you make film like Tendulkar said, when he wrote Gashiram Kotwal or anything, Polkar Ludwig. When you do things for way you know everything, a personal thing becomes universal. And that's what happened with Manik Das films, I think. And that was very important because then everybody could relate to it. So the relationship between the local and the global, or personal and universal, was made clear without using stupid words, just by showing the language of film. And I must end by telling the stupidity. When I went to Kolkata, he had finished writing the script for Uttaran. And this was Doctor's film. Myself and Satish Adekar, we went to his house and he was very keen to read out this. He read out the script to us. Very beautiful. And like a stupid fellow, I asked Manekda, I think you should let me act in this film. Because the subject very dear to me and I'm a doctor. He didn't say anything at all. So I said I made a mistake, big mistake. I shouldn't have done it. I've never done it, but I came home. But what was most fabulous, after about 2 months, I get a handwritten letter from Manikda explaining me why he can't cast me in this Bengali film. Though he likes me as an actor, what will he do? He says, I need a person who knows nuances of Bengali and Bengali living and everything. And that's why I come. It was such a. Then I was very happy that I asked him because he was probably the only director, of course, my heart went to it, but who explained to me, making it very clear how clearly he thinks about casting, character, and making it. So I'm extremely thankful to him. I have that letter. I've preserved it like his earlier letters. Thank you.
Got that. Samit, you want to say something?
Ma'am, let me talk after a few minutes. I've got my maid cleaning the house right now. So
Okay,
there's lots
but
of
I
extra,
thought you
extra
might want to
sounds.
say something. I also want to look at his process of working with other technicians. You know, there was Subrata Mitra, then Bansi Chandragupta and Dulal Datta who all edited all his films. And later on, he was actually wielding the camera and doing a lot of things. Of course, music also, he was completely. So, do you have anything to say? Would you like to say something, Aparna, or even Shamik Da? Would you like to tell us something about that?
I will interject here. I will definitely
Hari.
say that I am convinced that he really as Manita said, sorry, Samikda said that he interiorized his film so much, and there was also production pressures. Now, if he had to really pass on what he thought to other music directors and other editors, he'll never be able to finish the film. So I think he always told me, this production. I have to work hard. And if I have centralized all my ideas, let me do it myself. I don't think he did it out of ego that I have to show I am a great craftsman. In the interest of production and return the money to the producer on time, in budget, that was always his primary concern. And I must tell you, that stressed him enormously.
But
he was a stressed man.
It was
Yes.
also, there was also, Hariharanji, the fact of Manik Kaka actually having complete clarity of vision,
Exactly.
complete clarity of vision, and also enjoying every single process of filming.
Right.
It was so much relation. I used to act sometimes in the studio in the studio. There was a testing room. Okay. So I used to go there and chat with him while he edited. And Bilal edited. He was talking to this edited scene called Movieola. So we would go with a lot of boys. I just pinpoint, put his finger on the, and by the time he put his finger there, by the time Dulalda could stop the machine had gone on about several frames ahead. So Dulalda and Manik Kaka had such a wonderful understanding that Dulalda could rewind it to the exact spot where Manik Kaka wanted to do. So that was the kind of this I've seen with my own eyes. I mean, I've been present.
And his when he started operating the camera,
that's
in
what.
Days and Nights of the Forest, he operated this Ariflex camera, and that memory game, the way it was shot. I mean, how could he do it? Because the camera was on trolley. He was a tall man. He was looking through the viewfinder with the Ariflex camera with the shutters going like that. Then he had to pan from one face to another. And it was the light was going, there were many pressures. I mean, it is an always one take, second take, and that's it. And perfect. The frame was just there. I mean, I just cannot imagine how he could do it. And that was the first time because Subrata was no longer there. And as Hariharan ji says, that it was mainly for economic reasons, because otherwise the contribution of the three, when Subrata, Bongshida, and of course Dulalda as an editor was always there, but and Manikda, when three of them worked, like in Nayok, the sets and the light, the way Subrata did the back projection back and forth, because from my point of view, the scene was moving this way, and from Uttam's point of view, the scene was moving that way. And there is not even a little bit of jerk. And the light changing from night to the morning. Subrata's contribution is enormous. And later, when Manikda became more, when he became more, outdoors were not there, slightly more verbose, if I dare use that, because earlier he had liberated so many of his scenes. His important scenes were without dialogues. And that time, we missed Subrata's photography. I mean, not that Shobindu was any less, but you know what I mean. Because that indoor photography was no longer what Subrata could have done.
Yeah.
And Bongshida's contributions were, that, Rina, if you remember that umbrella, when Opu's going from the job hunting. And he was delaying it. Bongshida kept saying 1 minute more, 1 minute more, He was waiting for an umbrella with a hole, which was in the foreground. And that changed the frame. So it's like, as you said, it created tremendous stress on the man. And he was a smoker. I remember at Nayok, when during lunch break, all of us went out and sometimes I came back a little early. He always had his lunch inside, sitting next to the camera, having his lal doi and fried fish from Furpose, and chewing on a handkerchief, every day destroying one handkerchief. So it was like a lot of stress, because from A to Z, he was doing everything, from wardrobe designing later. So I think that was, but the contribution of these three in his films, and his best films are done under the three of them.
So did you
It is undoubtable.
Yeah. So did you have a lot of rehearsals? Considering that you had the stock was an issue, you couldn't shoot too many takes.
Not at all. I mean, in that memory game, because there's so many of us are involved, and everybody has to do that. And first thing we knew when we arrived that we have to finish this scene within 2 hours. So there was that pressure. But no, not extensive rehearsal, no workshop. We were given the script, but completely discouraged to memorize the lines. We were told not to. And it just happened so because he was so calm, he was in control of the situation, both at indoors and outdoors. He was in command, and we just looked up at him and we saw him there, and it just happened. I mean, and even if, let's say, there was a little hiccup or there was a NG, there was never any tension, and nobody actually, and somehow this Robida had the entire space to himself. He could improvise and ad lib, and Manikda didn't say anything. And if Soumitra just moved 1 inch here or 1 inch there, or just, scratched his head, Manikda said, "No, you can't do that." And apparently he did that within Satranj Ki Khiladi also. Haribhai said that, if my elbow went up a little bit, it was a problem. Whereas Said Jafri could do whatever he wanted. So, but it was not that he was against war, but he was interested and convinced about the character. He had the character in mind, So that is why. But, and, when you see Days and Nights in the Forest in, let's say, in Paris or Washington, moment Robida is on the screen, the entire house bursts out laughing. I mean, he became so popular. So the film was, this alienation of the middle class, the way they cannot understand their own country, the sunset without the tropes of a Western image, it was understood better there than here. Here, it was understood at one level, And when you were talking about his dependence on Ritl, I think it was discussed earlier, his Upushankshar was also written because that was not part of the Vibhuti Bhushan's thing. Kanchanjunga, Nayak was his own. And two, the film that he was asked to make it in English, and he says, "No, I can't make it in English." So it was without words. But that was his also, that small film with 2 children, talking about war in such a not simplistic, but was an easy fashion. And then again, somebody said that you have to see a film over and over again to understand. Recently, Reena, when I was watching Shima Bagdho, and I remember we had this argument later, we won't go into that, but watching Shima Bagdho, when Tutul enters, the curtains are billowing, they're blowing in the wind. I never noticed that. And at the end, the curtains are still. I mean, whether I'm reading into it or not, but I think it is trying to say that, something is about to happen, I think. And after the party, Tutul leaves the door of a room open. Yeah. I've seen it so many times. I never saw. I said, why did she leave the door open? Then, of course, she left the door open. But I hadn't noticed it earlier. So sometimes you do miss. And that scene or that particular shot is so telling. So I guess, I don't know. I think Manikda was just fantastic.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
And the dubbing that Mohan, I had to do that also. And he just, yes, I think all of us had to do it. I mean, he would give you you could hear it as many times as you wanted, and you had to get the rhythm right. And then you just have to speak it without the image. And it came out right. He didn't want you to be distracted looking at that and then trying to sync, because then sometimes it does take away, especially when you're doing emotional scenes where breathing is involved. Then it's a mess. Sometimes you see another acting and hear another acting, unless you are. I mean, all of us have become somewhat better. But I think as a newcomer, he completely. In Devi, we had to do a little bit of dubbing when we, the scene where she goes mad and all that. That was done outdoors. So that, and when she says, "Jodi ami Devi hoi, tomar jodi ko namongol hoy," that particular bit was also, I had to dub. But again, without any of these, and it was perfect match. So
I do that with children now. Whenever I have to get children to dub, I make them hear it and then say it.
Yes, otherwise you become too conscious. It's difficult.
Yes, Mohan, you want to say something? Mohan is.
I want to say 2 things. Rinku,
Yeah.
not many rehearsals, because he didn't like to lose the spontaneity.
Yeah.
He didn't want performances mechanical.
Yeah.
And I think that was also the reason that when the Shubhrotada left for whatever reason, he became operating cameraman, but he always, the credit was Shomendu for
Yes.
lighting camera or different. And while talking, but he refused. Now that's where the question is, who would cut the shot? Point is, when Manikda was getting what he wanted, somebody else saying the cut for technical was
He
very
would get very fed up. Yes.
upsetting for him.
Acting as a
Because he
yes.
said, look, I can't get that performance again
Yeah.
from that person. So to him, what mattered most, it didn't matter if a jerk, doesn't matter if the performance was correct.
Yes.
And you were good, and that was the reason why he became operating cameraman. I think it was amazing to listen to. With great respect for Shubhrutada, he also had, and everything. Otherwise, rest of his team was constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that moment after the, that, so he would cut a little bit later so that, he got that moment. And also often he took stills from those frames. Yeah.
I remember about, this reading meanings, as Sharmila ji was saying, that there is a shot in Charulata, Subrata was telling us, that there is a shot, a reverse angle shot of Madhavi and, her husband, and on the beach. It's a kind of, where they have reconciled,
Yes.
and there's a beautiful shot. There's a small conversation between them, and there's a sea lapping. And Manikda loved the shot. He said, great. Okay, take. Then Subrata said, something, when these guys were looking at each other and talking, there was a crow that was walking from this end of the frame to the other end of the frame. Don't you think that will be disturbing? He says, no. I'm sure the world will find some meaning in that shot. Why the crow walked in that shot?
Yeah, and
It is
actually,
a metaphor.
No.
Yes,
and
and
also Shubhrata started taking too long to light up his. I
Exactly.
remember in Baby, I used to go to sleep, lying on the bed, and then he'd still be lighting. So Manikda couldn't afford the delay. I mean,
Exactly.
economics mattered to him a lot.
Rinku, he also told me that he got very fed up with Shubhrata, even though Shubhrata was so brilliant, Shubhrata never reading the script.
Yeah.
He said Shubhrata twice needs to read the
Yes.
script.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
said,
Yeah.
yes.
Because Shubhrata
But
started, he was a still
added a lot.
cameraman when he did Pocket Panchali. That was the first time he became he worked a movie camera. So I think their association goes back a long time. But everybody changes. But I really missed Bongshida's absence so much. He was such a pal. And he was such a brilliant man and so underrated and so less talked about. And I remember in Arunaraje 3, we had ganged up, because everybody became very, very correct. So, they would hide their cigarettes and everything when Manikda walked in. So he kind of stopped coming. But Bongshida was part of the gang. And sometimes we would say things, Manikda did this and Manikda did that. And he would say, no, Manik orukum noy, tumra bhul bujcho ke. He's not like that. But all our complaints were directed at Bongshida. So, he was such a good human being, really.
And that reflects in his films.
So selfless, and commerce made no sense to him, He was and so fond of Manikda and so fond of good work. You don't get people like that.
You're right. You don't get people like that. Reflects that, his love for people, the humanity, everything, it reflects in his work. I mean, and the dedication. And if somebody has to take these young filmmakers, there's so much they can learn from him, Even if you watch Patil Panchali, just that one film, you still learn so much.
Like that shot of Ingrid Thakurun, when she's eating, and after washing her hand, she's nurturing the plant. She throws the little bit on the plant. Either you see it or you miss it. but she does that.
Yes.
So it's so wonderful that, and she, her character, just
It's all the little touches, all the little things that matter, and you do notice, and it takes a much deeper meaning, and it makes it so much more meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so amazing actually, and such a satisfactory. You feel so satisfied when you see a film so beautifully made, and and the characters speak to you. Actually, they connect with you. It's not like you're watching a film.
And the language, his writing had his brevity of language. Like in Bengali, when he's writing a book, আমি উৎসর্গ করব, like I'll dedicate this book. The Shargo means heaven also. And I say ki Shargo. And then he says to my wife, and she says, wife mane jani. I know the meaning of wife. And he says, tumi jano na, ami jani. You don't know, but I know. I mean, it's so romantic and it's so beautiful.
Very charming, very sweet and
Afshosh bojo afshosh, অনুশোচনা, I mean, he plays on words, and then tomar choki ki ache bolo, Kajol, and then Kajol, the son is called Kajol later. And when they open, Oppu also opens the mask, and you see in Patil Panchali Oppu's face, and then Kajol when he opens the, the whatever mask and that beautiful face. So I think, sorry, Marina.
No, I was going to say simply that he makes you care so much about your character.
Exactly.
After Aparna dies, like Oppu, you are so immersed in grief that you completely forget that there is a child.
Yes.
Until the child is born, you don't even remember that there is a child.
Absolutely. Yes. And coming back to language, when he says, he throws the stone at that sweet fellow, sweetmeat sellers, and he says, Baba, 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 to Baba to tikio dekha jay na. I don't know how to explain that.
Baba di tiki thake.
And the little boy says, Baba di buchi tiki thake. I mean, it's so innocent and so lovely. I mean,
and that boy was...
Yes, boy was in the face again. And that understanding, and his women, I mean, all the women in his film. I mean, look at the women. I mean, at that time, the Hindi films, it was a different kind of, you existed, vis-a-vis husband, brother. But his films were not like that. They were protagonists in their own. Sorbojaya's Dignity, Indit Thakurun, Mohan Agashe. I mean, you just name, and even his Kaberi Di in Orune Din Ratri.
Yes.
What a wonderful performance.
Yeah. And the way he looked at women, treated women, there's so much respect. You could feel that, every character, whichever kind of female character was there, that there's so much respect. And people
agency. Now look at me, like you have talking about moral compass and all that. In the two shots, in one when Aparna is seeing that, comes across the Sautal twist, and Kaberi Di saying, "Oof, chichi chalo, let's go back," and she is just wants to see more. They're all dancing and drunk, and she can't get enough of it. And Shima Badho, when they're playing, they're at the races, and she's lost, and she says, "Abar khelbo." So that excitement and that wanting to be a little more, for want of a better word, wild, is also exists in a woman. She's not so calibrated and so organized and so controlled. So that need to sometimes go beyond that is there. So those little touches are all there for you to see or not see.
Yeah. Even, ma'am, the depictions of sexuality which Ray has are absolutely unparalleled in Indian cinema.
Absolutely.
Without anybody having to show a bit of skin more than your face or your eyes, he could depict everything. I mean, Aranya Dine Ratri, the Bhabi, and the scene in there. It's just so raw and it hurts you every time you see it. Or you see Shatranj Ke Khiladi as Sanjeev Kumar and Shabana. It's the only depiction of male impotency you will see on screen. And where's the skin? Everybody wonders where's the skin. There's no skin. You don't see anything beyond their faces.
Yeah.
But that is the magic of Rai. I mean,
Even in Opur Shankshar, when Soumitra wakes up and finds that hairpin,
completely.
it says it all.
Magic. It's magic.
Yeah,
I don't know what's the word for it.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, I think we should take some questions and
Yeah,
Hari,
it's time
Hari,
to
bolo.
take some questions.
I
Let
I
Hari.
have one question for the three of you were met in the last days. Was he a happy man when he was making Ganashatru, Shoka Prashaka, and Agantu?
Well, I went to interview Manikda when I was with Karan Thapar doing Eyewitness. When there was news television hadn't arrived. And when I got there, he was very, he had said yes, but then he got very nervous. He said, I got my first heart attack when BBC, I gave an interview to BBC. So we did his bit, but my close-ups or my part wasn't taken because he didn't want any light. So after everybody left, it happened to be my birthday also. So Monkudi and he, they got a cake and they all sang happy birthday, Rinku. So they were very, very fond. But he had become a little feeble. And also Momata Shankar used to tell me that he would look at Monkudi a lot to, when they were recording music. So, and he allowed his son to sometimes, he would be sitting down. He was not, I think his health, the impact of his health on his filmmaking constricted him. And I don't know, I think he was happy, but he was anxious. I found him very anxious. And I saw him quite a lot in that time, not when he became very ill, but just say 6 months before that. And then like every 2-3 months, somehow I was in Calcutta and I would meet him. I found him a little anxious.
Yes, Mohan?
You're
Particularly students in Film Institute were not happy about these last 3 films because in their opinion, they didn't have any take-home message. But what I felt, because I kept on meeting him only after 81, and Rinku said, from 81 itself, when he was not allowed to smoke, he used to keep pipe in his mouth without tobacco. And that he didn't leave till the end. He wanted that oral satisfaction. And I saw all these 3 films, and I think that time he was concerned about making statements.
Yes, more verbs.
He wanted to make important statements at that point of life and not necessarily concerned about whether he's giving anything new in filmmaking. What is it? Maybe because of aging, knowing what future will bring.
But important statements when he talks about don't be Kupamunduk, like don't be a frog in the well. And there is no such thing as boundary. Culture transcends boundary.
Yeah.
So, all these are very important statements. I mean, our narrow definition of nationalism.
Rinku, put your
Go
mic
beyond
on.
that. Sorry.
Put your mic on, Rinku.
It is on.
It's on.
Okay.
It is on.
Sorry.
We can hear.
Yeah. So I think he made very, very important statements in those films. If you just hear it. But it was, as a cinema, perhaps, it's not as satisfying as, obviously his best, Charulata and, those films, his trilogy, those films stand out. Teen Konya, they were different.
Yes.
Baby.
Aparna, you're muted.
Mic, ma'am.
I do feel something though that we have to consider his evolution as a filmmaker, comparing it to how India evolved as a country. He was deeply disappointed. There was in Jono Arunno, it was
Yes.
like what we would call a hahakar. You know,
Yes.
John Arnold is one of my favorite films.
Yes.
There's irony, there is anger, and there is also a great kind of wail of disappointment. After that, there is an attempt on his part as a mature filmmaker, a senior citizen, etc., to try and the youth of the country how to go about living their lives and not follow the road the country was taking. I think that was the urgency that he felt inside him.
Absolutely.
Which is why you sometimes feel I understand when some people say that those films are a little preachy. Perhaps his earlier films are not, but I think by this time he knew that this time is slowly coming to an end, and he really wanted to convey this to the
Like in Jono, I don't know when he's correcting the exam papers without his glasses because his glasses are not there, and there's load shedding. There's only a lantern. In
Yes.
that, he's somebody's future is at his hand, and of course in Aparna's also when they're having ice cream in 36 Jordangi Lane in front of Victoria. Those exam papers are also made into thonga,
Yeah.
and they're having that. So you see where they end up actually when you put all your energies into that. So Janu Aruna was a fantastic in Protidhundi when Ritiman is so angry and everything, and the car is stalled and there are people and pushing the car. And there is and in Tritiman is trying to hit the car, and he sees a schoolgirl in a school uniform sitting inside, and he doesn't know. I mean, is she the culprit? Is he going to hit her? So those sort of shots are all over his films. It is not like Rinalda, or Ritik Khatuk, Rinalda is spelling it out in a kind of, and also joining in street marches, a great filmmaker. But Manikda is beyond that, beyond the obvious.
Actually, a completely different kind of filmmakers.
Kind of protest.
Yes.
It goes beyond the today. That is why his films are so relevant. Because he's pointing out that he's telling us what to look at, that it is not what it seems, what is apparent to you. There are things behind it and beyond it, and you look for it. And if you see it, then your enjoyment and your involvement is so much more.
That's right, absolutely. So well put, because you get really, and even now after so many years, I mean, we saw first Patil Panchali like 50 years ago. I saw it, that was first time I was exposed to his work. And then every time I see Patil, there's something new I notice and take back. So that was the kind of filmmaking and cinema. I mean, I don't call it, because this cinema is a very special word for me. Cinema and films are different. Like cinema is cinema and filmmaking is, whatever they are doing. But so that was cinema for me, what he...
Yes, magic.
Yes. All right, you want to take questions now?
Aruna, I had something to say.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
In December 81, I did a longish interview with Manikda, and I was complaining. He hadn't had his heart attack yet. It came the next year, early next year. Just before that, so he was in full health and vigor and everything. And I was complaining at the beginning of the interview that for the last few years, after John Orono, he hadn't made the films that we really expect from him. And then he paused and waited for a little while and said that he has reached a point of frustration in the national scene, in his feelings, in his genuine human feelings about the reality, that he thinks that after John Orono, the decline, the devastation of values and everything, it was the end of the road. And maybe he should begin to negotiate with and deal with children. Look for a new beginning to make films for children, give more time to writing for children. So a new beginning had to be made at a point of crisis. And this was a very genuine crisis. It's not a question of cinema or anything. It was a crisis about the reality around it. He was shocked and horrified, and it was a feeling of the end of the road. That he asserted very strongly and said, so I'll make more films for children. I'd write for children because a beginning should be there with them. At the same time, he said he had just started work planning and done the initial casting for Hariharan. He was aware, very strongly aware of the rise of this phony nationalism. And he felt, so one last film, one last discursive film that I have to make is on nationalism, and therefore to Hariharan. So Hariharan was a political choice, a moral choice at that point of time, at the end of 81. Otherwise, he was thinking more and more of concentrating on children, looking towards a new beginning. So a filmmaker reaches a point through his filmmaking where the moral issues are overpowering and the choices are determined not so much by cinematic considerations or creative considerations as a deep, profound, painful, agonizing moral concern. And I could see that in Manikda. And Hariharan, he planned at that point of time to be his last film in the discursive mode.
Yeah, thank you, Shamik.
I think you should ask Aparna to comment on this because she's remade Hariharan.
Yes, I made Hariharan. Actually, Tagore's Hariharan is a highly political novel because politics plays a very, very, it's like another character almost. It's very much there. I mean, it revolves around that. That was, Tagore was very skeptical about the kind of nationalism that, Shundi sort of presents. And in my Hariharan Aaj, there is politics, and that politics is the politics of today. The Hindu nationalism that has become, so overpowering that people want India to be a Hindu state, So this is a Hindu nationalist. Shundip here is a Hindu nationalist. So that was, actually, it was not influenced by Manikaka's Hariharan. Manikaka and I both made films out of Tagore's Hariharan. Manikaka made it in the time that it was set. I made it in today's context. That's all.
I think we'll take some questions now.
Yeah.
Yes, Amit?
There's nothing in the chat box, so questions will have to be live or whoever wishes to ask.
Yes, anybody, does anybody have some questions? Otherwise, we can talk.
May I, ma'am? May I?
Yes, Purbi, and then Deepshika.
Good evening, everyone. I am Purbi Bhattacharya from Gujarat. I have two quick questions, one for Ma'am Tagore and the other for every esteemed guest here. The first question to Sharmila ma'am is that you did Oronno Din Ratri with the author. What was it like revisiting Abar Oronni with Gautam Ghosh? And the second question is, once upon a time, there was a marriage of literature and film. In today's or the contemporary films that we see in OTT platforms or wherever we are watching, we do not see that kind of amalgamation. What are your studied opinion?
Well, to answer your first question about Abar Oronni, Gautam wanted to pay a tribute to Manikda and, assembled all of us, Shomitra, Shomit, Shubhendu, and now they're married, so they're, others. And then, of course, I'm there, Aparna. So and of course, we couldn't go back to Palamau. That was, Manikda had kind of hinted at the corruption when all these smug boys sort of say, thank God for corruption. Actually, they are the ones who bribe the chowkidar.
Mhm.
And then they pass a comment on his morality. So, but now that forest, which was so beautiful then, and we lived alone. I was alone in one place and not at all scared. For a moment, we used to go and dance with the Santals, and full moon, we could hear the elephants. We stayed there for a month. So that we couldn't do. So we had to go to another location. And with no offense to Gautam Ghosh, who's a wonderful director, there is no comparison between the two.
Yes.
And also towards the end, he couldn't really, for many reasons, financial, seasonal. He wanted a flood. He wanted the road to be completely blocked so that nobody could. So he couldn't do all that at the end. He creates beautiful moments. He creates a beautiful atmosphere, but he doesn't know how to end it. So there is no way it's comparable, but it still is, I would say it's a good effort and a good film. And Gautam creates, as Aparna had said earlier, some wonderful moments. And it was such a personal joy for me to meet all these, oldies. And Aruna, I don't know about the time. You just stop me whenever.
That's okay.
We shared a duck bungalow, Shomitra, Shubhendu, and I. And it was such a privilege because, I would be waking up with a cup of coffee and Shomitra would have done his walk and he would have come back and he was doing his exercise in the veranda while singing. And then Shubhendu was ordering breakfast. And it was like, three buddies, together. And after a day's work, when we would be together, Shubhendu will start somewhere, and when he finishes, Shomitra will take over. They would cover Shishir Bhaduri, Ahindra Babu, stage, cinema, politics, sports, philosophy, poetry, everything. I wish I had recorded that. So it was such a, and then Shomit was so ill with cancer. And he said, there's no way you can keep me out of it. I'm coming. So there were so many after stories. Beyond the scenes, there were so many stories and so much love and so much interaction between the main cast. Of course, Bongshida was not there and others were not there. But so I think that is a gain for me personally for Abar Arunne. But as a film, they're in different space. And why there is no... I think today, if I may say, India has opened up. There's so much churning. There's so much, audience appetite for different genre of films. And do we really need, that? Why can't people create? Why can't people say what they want to say? There are short film, 10-minute format. There are 1 hour format. There are all kinds of ways of expressing yourself, and people are doing just that. So I think there are, if you go through the OTT platforms, you'll find so many wonderful films that are happening right now. I'm so happy. And such wonderful actors. Everybody is an actor. So filmmaking has come to, and there are different ways of filmmaking. It's come to another standard. So I think it's a personal choice. I right now, top of my head, cannot think recently which published work has been, because there's a beautiful, Fani Chandra's film, stories, Prem Chandra's short stories too. There are many, many. At one point, I heard that Mrinal Pandey's, what was the name of the Lal Mahal, something, that was going to be made, but that stopped. So often people talk about making a film from literature, a published book, but they haven't yet. But I don't think that's something to worry about as such, because there are a lot of good films and good efforts are coming out. Just now what we saw, this Gili Chuppi with your Konkona. She was so brilliant in that. This Haidari, Aditya
Yeah.
Haidari and her. in this uh, uh, lesbian relationship. It was so wonderful. Konkona was out of this world. So it's
And the director is a very good director. That
a
particular
very good
director is very
director. And so there are lots of wonderful things are being made, lot of churning, and people are I mean, we got in Hindi films, those hand-wringing, weepy, a certain kind of roles. The vamps were different. Heroines couldn't do what a vamp could do. So thank God we've moved away from all that.
Yeah.
And now today we are at liberty to do whatever role that will. You're not typecast, a good woman, bad woman. All those differentiation has disappeared. So I think this has given us an opportunity. Earlier, when a big film was ready, Dilip Kumar, Anupama couldn't be released. You have to wait because a big star. So all those things now a cheap film is being shown, a big film is so all that is for the better, for the filmmaker, students, everybody. So there is a huge big opportunity and market and spectators there, and they appreciate everything because now we are used to better films. Earlier we had to go to film society to see a good film. Now we are seeing sitting at our home, interviews or whoever, whatever you want to see, and that has created an appetite, a quality of looking at films. So it has enhanced the audience's capability of accepting different films. So I think we are in a wonderful place, and I think it's such a privilege to be an actor and such a privilege to be involved in this, that start, sound, and cut. Those minutes and time in front of the camera is where we come alive, really. I mean, otherwise life is wonderful, and we are all dealing with this lockdown very well. That everybody is dying to get back to work and, doing that. So I think it's a wonderful profession and it will grow better and better. A lot of people say that it's going to become now the Bahubali kind of film. People will no longer go to the theater because now cinema is coming to us. We are not going to cinema, So audience is dictating. But even then, a good film will remain a good film. And if it can, as Aparna said, creates moments, touches us, like Souls at Night kind of film, we will see it.
Yes, Ananth wants to add something.
Yes, if I may add very humbly, I mean, taking off from cinema being inspired by published work, what I'm most excited about is the urge to pay tribute to Satyajit Ray. And Sandeep Rai has been very, very graceful in giving me the rights of one of Satyajit Ray's original works, Golpa Bole Tarani. And I'm looking forward to doing that. It's very, he's been very clever when he wrote it. He couldn't make it as a Bengali film. We have to make it as a Hindi film because it's about two characters who do not know each other's language. So when Mr. Nasiruddin Shah and Paresh Rawal heard this, they were absolutely blown. And, we are all looking forward as a team to making the film called The Storyteller based on Satyajit Ray's story. But the biggest challenge here is that there's a sword hanging on my head. And I've asked for trouble by actually trying to pay tribute to this great master. So I'd better make it the way it should be made. If the world could turn around and say, why the hell did they have to touch Satyajit Ray? I'd better not, do something like that. I'd rather they say, yes, probably if Ray had made it, he would have been very close to this. So that's the big challenge that is facing all of us. And hopefully we'll, give you a film in the centenary year to pay tribute to the great master.
Thanks, Amit. Yes, so who else had a question? I think Deepshika had, yes.
Yeah.
Deepshika.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you everyone for this wonderful conversation. It was absolutely riveting. My question is sort of related, funnily enough, to what Mr. Ananth Mahadevan was saying. This is from a podcast that I was listening to by Dhritiman Chatterjee for The Wire, and he was saying that with Satyajit Ray, because he's such an icon and he's such a legend, the legacy that he's left behind, sometimes what is missed is, especially because there's a film appreciation course, any sort of criticisms that may come from reading his films, because we are also taken by the magic that he created on screen. This is what Dhitiman Chatterjee was saying. So how far would this is open to anyone who would like to answer it, how far would you agree to what he was saying?
See, criticism of Ray's films are a tradition at FTII, by the way.
Absolutely.
Please,
See,
let me honestly tell you, it is a tradition at FTII to be saying, this is ridiculous. When some students will tell you, there's only one film Ray made, that is Fateh Panchali. After that, rest is rubbish.
that should not be taken seriously.
I know, please. But this is FTII, And you see, to equally counter that, Ray was equally critical of all these Godards and Trousseaus and all these new wave fellows, that anything goes for them. Unstructured films, non-narratives are for them this rule, So the FTII students think that is the right way. So I think the atmosphere at FTII has to accept the non-narrative fellows along with structured narratives of Satyajit Ray in equally balanced manners, To be a rebel, you don't have to be a rebel against a structured narrative of Satyajit Ray, So that criticism there sometimes becomes a love-hate relationship in a way. Yes.
We have a tendency as Indians, I'm not talking about FTII, but otherwise we have a tendency to turn a genius into a god. And that is a mistake.
Yeah.
Because that is not respect, that is blind devotion, And there's no point in that. See, a person like Ray, who has given us so many masterpieces, is it humanly possible for anybody to churn out one masterpiece after another? There will be, and you have to realize that a genius like Ray, an auteur like Ray, was also fallible and human and suffered from ill health and things like that. You can't. I feel that if I were to be critical of a certain film or a certain scene, that in no way diminishes Ray in my eyes. He remains the greatest filmmaker we've had so far. But I don't believe in blind devotion.
I completely agree with Aparna, because any artist, take a musician, take a singer, take anyone, he cannot keep, creating that kind of peak performance every time and being human, because you're also growing, you're creating, you're developing yourself, you're reaching new heights, you're exploring. So any artist cannot. Yeah, so it's not. And but if you look at his work and what he's done, I think it's just so amazing. And that should not take away his mastery, the way we can look at him. But, and every work, and what is, when you say perfect, what is perfect? Idea of perfection, it's ridiculous. Because it's all, there's change, standards change, people change. The point is, what is cinema doing to, is it touching you? It is telling you something. Are you getting something? Are you taking something home? And he had left us with a lot to, appreciate and work. That's very important.
No, Hari was pointing out the other thing also right at the beginning, that Rai probably has the greatest range in terms of the kinds of films he has made. Run through cinema history world over, and you'd be hard put to find any filmmaker with this kind of range who could make a horror film like Monihara and follow it with Gopiga and Bhagavan, which is completely in a different world. And you don't find that ranges in, for example, Bergman or Kurosawa or John Ford or any of the great Hitchcock or any of the greats in cinema that we study. That's one of the uniquenesses of Rai, which is what makes him relevant to practically every filmmaker practicing.
And that is why, he's exploring new areas, he's exploring new kind of subject, he's bringing his cinema to so many different places. And that's what growing is about. Otherwise, he'll become stagnant. If you don't take new challenges as an artist.
Follow it from what Hari was saying. there is a story in FTI that, under Wisdom Tree, somebody was criticizing a film of Rai's, and Mr. Ghatak happened to be there. And he boxed the fellow and said, when you make a film which is 1/10 as good as Rai, then talk. Otherwise, don't talk about it. So, it's not like Rai doesn't need to be fossilized in any sense of the word. He's very much a vibrant, alive figure, even at a time when, in 20 years' time, when all the people who knew him personally might not be around. But that doesn't mean the films will stop being relevant.
Yeah.
They will still remain so completely. And that is why they are already classics. I mean,
that I was just coming to that. That's how classics get created. They're not at that time, but when they stood the test of time, that's when they become classics.
No, I mean, I've seen films with today's generation, Days and Nights and Upushangshan, and 5-6 generations away, it's still resonating with them. The romance has not, the romance of Upushangshan has not palled at all. So it's I think
the same
we
time,
sort of to make.
At the same time, even from his lifetime, there has been a lot of criticism of his work.
Yes.
And even he has fought against them, commented on them, criticized them. There have been debates over his films, which is part of the contribution of any outstanding
like
filmmaker.
Devi was criticized so much. Devi was criticized, and the communist government did nothing because they said they felt that superstition should not be allowed anyway. So they didn't stop the protesters. But it was not at that level. It had gone beyond that, but nobody had bothered to look at it. So Devi did very badly at the box office.
Ma'am, even now, every year there are a few students in FTI who have not seen what shall I say? Who have not seen enough of Rai when they come to FTII.
But that will be their loss.
And but the first time,
This is the problem.
The first time you see Patil Panchali or Aparajitu, it's like a world-changing event for most people, without any doubt. I haven't met anybody who didn't change his or her views on cinema after seeing just these two films.
Yeah. But for some reason,
I'll tell you one thing.
I don't know, for
After
some
85,
reason, one second, Mohan. For some reason, the distribution of Ray's films, it's very difficult because some family still owns, like Arunaraje Ratri is owned by one family and somebody else. So to get rights to show it elsewhere, even when we try for film festivals abroad, it becomes a challenge. They ask for too much money, etc., etc. So it's not always easy to show, and some films that has Criterion has restored or the Academy has restored, that also becomes very expensive. And then the language. By the time Reena came along, we saw her films sitting in Delhi in theatres. So she got a theatre release for Mr. and Mrs. Iyer. But when Manik's time, the distribution system wasn't there. So
Absolutely.
Large section of India, why large, except Bengal, and the Bengali-speaking audience, were deprived of Ray's cinema. They talk about Ray. Satyajit Ray name is very well known to them, but they're not familiar with his films.
And it's very sad.
Sorry,
because,
Mohan, Reena, let Mohan speak.
After 85, when most of the filmmakers turned to television, including Ray, and Satyajit Ray presents these 13 short stories. When I acted in 3 and saw all, that time I was an FTII director, I thought and I begged Shamik, this should be shown to students. We were finally there to make a 20-minute film, diploma film, that make it a film. Short film can be made as interesting as a feature film. Please make your films as your first film, and please don't try to make it as your last film. This was bad. Wonderful films. They are in Hindi. And I still think the Film Institute all film schools should acquire them, where finally they have to make a 20-minute film. These are the role models for 20-minute films.
No, but you don't have to wait for language. Ma'am, sorry, please.
What
No,
I
it's
was
okay.
that earlier on, there was a slot in Doordarshan where they used to show regional films, award-winning regional films regularly. Even that has been taken away. So it's very sad. I was at the Bangalore Film Festival some years ago, and the people who were standing next to me were Girish Kasaravalli, Adur Gopalkrishnan, Gautam Ghosh. Nobody recognized any of them. Some recognized me because I've also acted. That's the only reason. But when I think that a filmmaker of Adur Gopalkrishnan's caliber is just not recognized anywhere. How many regional films do we get to see? I mean, of course, we have to see Satyajit Ray's films. We have still seen a lot of Satyajit Ray films. But think about the others like Arvindan, like Girish Kasaravalli, like Adur Gopalkrishnan. Their films, Shaji Karun. How many of their films do we get to see?
Absolutely right. Now, the only hope seems to be the OTT, because OTT is now able to bring some films to everybody. But people are not aware that, this is something to watch. And that's another problem.
Aparna, I must tell you that majority of these regional cinemas, these film prints are gone. Negatives are destroyed. Prints are disappeared.
That is.
They have not been digitized at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
My own films don't exist anymore.
And Hariharan, it really brought tears to my eyes when Girish, I asked him roughly around what kind of budget do you get? He said, and this was about 5 or 6 years ago, he said, well, we have to make a film within 25 lakhs. 25 lakhs for a filmmaker like Girish Kasaravalli?
That's all.
When I went to Cannes, they wanted to have a retrospective of Aparna Sen. They couldn't do it because they wanted a better technical quality. And they couldn't do it. They were dying to do it. But they couldn't get those kind of prints.
Yeah.
So we really, of course, restoration is happening, but not at the pace. When I went to Los Angeles and saw their facility, they even have a backup plan for a power cut. So, everything is kept so well. Whereas, and how they restored Manikda's films when it was burnt. How they collected the ash, how they did that's a story in itself. So nobody will do it for anybody else.
Ma'am, there's been a lot of progress on that. If you see the new facilities of the
Pune?
film archives. Yes, ma'am. There is the latest technology, and some of the best technology in the world is being employed to restore works.
I'm happy.
And it's one of the rare instances in the world where a central government has come forward and put in money. Yes, it took time. Yes, it took effort, but it is finally there. They are restoring films at a very high speed with extremely high quality.
Because
do come and have a look. Whenever you're in Pune, have a look, ma'am.
All film producers, all filmmakers have to give one print to the archive.
It used to be that. It used to be that any national award-winning film.
Any film that is made, we were told when I was in the board that you have to give it. And yet it was not looked after. And Alamara's, it disappeared. So many other films, old films, are in such condition that it can't be shown.
No, we have a total of 5 silent films from India, which is all that is available.
Poroma also.
Poroma is just not there because I think they were plugged.
Poroma is not there.
I've been there. I've been to the place. I've checked it out. And it was, now I'm glad that you're saying that people are looking after it. But at that time, it was compulsory for the print to be given. Ananth, you speak up. And yet, there was no accountability. And they were not digital print, they were films.
The footprints, yeah, we had to give them.
So
The laboratories in India took on the responsibility of keeping the negatives and not preserving the negatives.
well, there you are.
This is exactly what
That's
I
all.
lost my negative.
It was very literally storage of
That's
negative
what-
in a
And
loft where nothing else happened.
And,
But
and
let
it's
me,
just not the films are not just stories; they are recorded history.
yeah. So let
They
me
are
tell you the
time.
problem.
It is our heritage. It has to be
Okay.
preserved.
Yeah. So let me tell you the technical problem in this. That to preserve an Eastman negative film, you should have a freezer which is at minus
I
10
know.
degrees.
I went to the academy. I saw all their.
You see, and at 10% humidity.
Yeah.
In which part of India can we afford this kind of temperatures? So I will tell you what Hollywood has done. Hollywood is very clever. They were much advanced. They decided that Los Angeles has a humidity of 85%,
Yes.
where Hollywood is. So they built all their storages in the neighboring state of Nevada, a desert.
The bloody desert, yeah.
So desert has 0% humidity. All they needed to do was air condition that place. So there are underground vaults.
I
There
know.
are underground
I've seen
vaults.
everything.
So they have stored all their negatives
Oh,
because they know that there is a future in these negatives. See, they are seeing that as a product which is not just one for the release on that particular week, but to last out for several years. So preservation is certainly a very European habit by the way.
Yeah. What should
It's a very European habit, We
Aruna,
don't have that habit.
Aruna, may I leave now, please?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
also,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
all
wind
of
up.
us maybe, but I want to really thank you so much. Really, really appreciate from the bottom of my heart because this is like, the students are
No,
really.
I think you should do
Yeah.
more often because I've
Yes.
enjoyed myself and seeing Mohan, Anand, Reena.
Yeah, we'll certainly call you then, for
and
sure.
it's a learning process, and so everybody spoke so very well. Hariharan ji and Amit
Thank
ji and everybody. So it's been a learning process, and I've really, really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank Aparna.
Thank you. Bye, Reena. Bye,
Find you. Yes. Thank you so much again for being here with us.
Yes.
And, this is important that we meet and discuss and talk about
Yeah.
things that matter to us. And the common factor being cinema, so important to actually interact like that. Shweta, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank
And we want to definitely continue doing this sort of thing. It's very
Let's
important.
do it. I am with
Yes.
you. I am with
Yes, Hari, we'll do this. Hari, thank you. Anand, thank you. And
Thank you.
everyone else, I have to thank Mr. Kethola and Mr. Dum and the whole team that put this together, from the archives, and also Devjani, she's not well, but she did, and Anupam, who stepped in. Thank you, everyone who's here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Shamik.
Thank you. And just
Bye.
let's celebrate cinema and keep celebrating cinema. Thank you, Mohan. Thank you. That's
Okay.
all we know. That's what matters.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, thank you so much for this session. My God. We're so
Thank you
honored,
so
so privileged,
Thank
and
you so much. Thank you
humble.
so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am.
this was your special thing for you guys because no
You
one
made
else
it
was
possible.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you so
Thank
much.
you
You made it
so much.
possible.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm very well organized also.
Thank you so
Also,
much.
ma'am, you look beautiful.